New reports published by the IDF say that there were as many rockets fired from Gaza into Israel in 2017 as there were in both 2015 and 2016 combined. But with that in mind, it's still a far cry away from the number of rockets that have been shot into Israel in the past. Between 2007, when Hamas took control of the Strip, and 2014, during the height of the last Israeli-Gaza war, roughly 19,000 rockets and mortars have been fired into Israel from Gaza, the most being just under 5,000 in 2014. In 2015, there were just 21 rockets, and 15 more in 2016. But this past year, 35 projectiles were launched into Israeli territory from the Strip, leading some to think that more violence is soon to come. But most evidence seems to indicate that it's actually the Palestinian Islamic Jihad organization and not Hamas who is launching the attacks. Either way, Israel has responded with 59 strikes on Hamas terrorist targets, as Hamas is held responsible for any violence that threatens Israeli sovereignty. Of the 35 rockets sent into Israel this past year, most have fallen into empty fields, but about 10 either fell in southern Israeli residential areas or were struck down by the Iron Dome system. Though Israel is now enjoying a relative calm, the Israeli Security Cabinet has been regularly meeting recently to discuss the mounting threats in the north. Discussions described Sunday as extremely significant. According to the limited reports allowed past the military censor, the primary concerns illustrated in these meetings are about Iranian-backed forces in Syria and Lebanon joining forces and posing an existential threat to Israel. According to IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot, Iran is a, quote, multi-dimensional threat that's been spreading its roots deep into the region for a long time now. Aside from the fact that Iran is building military installations in southern Syria, and that Syrian government forces are already publicly working together in the Golan with Iranian-supported soldiers and Hezbollah, Eisenkot claims that the Islamic regime is also spending billions of dollars annually on funding terror by proxy. He said Iran spends between $700 million and $1 billion per year on Hezbollah alone, with another $100 million each to groups like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and militias in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. Israel's response to these threats remains to be released, but judging from rhetoric used in the past and meetings between Israeli officials and regional players, you can be sure it will be fierce.
The Syrian army is reporting that Israel struck overnight a Syrian base east of Damascus. The report suggests the target of the attack was an arms depot used by Assad's army. According to foreign sources, Israel struck various locations in Syria over the past few months. As in previous alleged attacks, there is no comment from the IDF regarding the incident overnight.
Leaders in Iran are again gearing up to defend the nuclear deal, finally signed in 2015 after years of delays. On Monday, President Hassan Rouhani had this reminder: Donald Trump has failed every time the White House has tried to confront Iran. And the Foreign Ministry warned Washington not to do anything it might regret.
We have to wait for their decision. As for Iran's stance, we've made all the necessary predictions about any scenario, and all options for different situations are on the table, depending on what the United States decides to do.
At a security conference in Tehran attended by foreign dignitaries and regional allies, Iran's defense minister told them that the U.S. is orchestrating artificial conflicts in the Middle East to create perpetual war.
We understand well why the West, especially the US, are pursuing Iranophobia. This is a total American story that says for the progress of America's economy, staging wars is inevitable. So from their perspective, it's necessary to produce permanent war and tension to sell weapons.
Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif is scheduled to meet his European Union counterpart later this week in Brussels. The EU has been a vocal supporter of the nuclear deal, and talks are expected to focus on how to save it from collapse in the face of US threats.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is pushing for greater civil liberties in the wake of the deadly unrest that rocked Iran in recent days. He told officials today the problem the country has is the gap between officials and the young generation, saying younger people have a different way of thinking. He says, quote, "We want our grandchildren's generation to live as we lived, but we can't impose that on them." Since May, his failure to appoint any women to his cabinet or make any progress on freeing political prisoners has left many in the country disillusioned.
The Palestinian leadership is looking to advance the weight of Europe as a mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process as ties with the United States continue to deteriorate in the wake of Trump's Jerusalem announcement. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says the US has lost its role as a mediator in the peace process, stressing the great role Europe can play due to its political and economic powers. This during a meeting with Norway's Foreign Minister Ine Eriksen in Ramallah on Monday. Following the meeting, Eriksen told news outlets that Trump's Jerusalem declaration was problematic, but there's a will to negotiate on both sides. Meanwhile, US Vice President Mike Pence will visit the Middle East next week, but isn't expected to meet with Palestinian officials.
Pence will leave Washington, D.C. for Egypt to meet with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Then the VP will head to Jordan and meet with King Abdullah II before spending the latter 2 days in Israel. His trip was originally focused on Christians and other religious minorities and was planned for late December. Now his office said the trip will focus on terrorism. Pence will, quote, reaffirm our commitment to work with the United States allies in the region to defeat radicalism that threatens future generations.
Nuclear weapons should be banned, there should be a united effort to tackle climate change and efforts made to stop stirring up primal fears about newcomers like migrants. It was a hard-hitting State of the World address Pope Francis delivered in the Vatican. He also called for more dialogue to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula. Peace is not built by vaunting the power of the victor over the vanquished, he says. Future acts of aggression are not deterred by the law of fear, but rather by the power of calm reason that encourages dialogue and mutual understanding as a means of resolving things. The pontiff also repeated his call for a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians and respect for the status quo of Jerusalem. The Holy See calls for a common commitment to respect in conformity with the relevant United Nations resolutions the status quo of Jerusalem, a city sacred to Christians, Jews and Muslims.
Città sacra ai cristiani, ebrei e musulmani.
The Pope addressed envoys from more than 180 countries. It comes a day before North and South Korea are due to hold talks expected to address North Korea's participation in the upcoming Winter Olympics.
Despite recent heightened tensions, North and South Korea have begun their first high-level talks for more than 2 years. A huge media contingent watched the South Korean delegation on their way to the venue for the talks in the Peace House in the truce village of Panmunjom. There was optimism on both sides at the outset, with one delegate describing the talks as baby steps in the process of rapprochement. World leaders are watching closely for any sign of a reduction in tensions on the Korean peninsula. The meeting comes amid rising fears over North Korea's development of nuclear weapons in defiance of UN Security Council resolutions. The focus of the discussions is North Korea's possible participation in the 2018 Winter Olympics, which take place in South Korea next month.
Now it's time to take a look at the stories making headlines around the world. And we're going to start with a visit to China by the President of France. Emmanuel Macron began his first state visit to the country on Monday with a stop in Xi'an, an eastern departure point of the ancient Silk Road. For more on this and other news, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So Adam, what exactly did this trip involve?
Well, Mark, Macron is hoping to relaunch EU-China relations often strained by Beijing's restrictions on foreign investment and trade. Europe has voiced concerns over whether Beijing's massive Silk Road revival plan, known as the Belt and Road Project, is aimed at expanding trade or if it is for geopolitical influence. Speaking at an event with business people, academics and students at the Daming Palace, Macron gave voice to those concerns.
After all, the ancient Silk Roads were never only Chinese. If I'm completely honest, I'm simply saying that in inherent way these roads can only be shared. If they are roads, they cannot be one way. There must be comings and goings.
Later on Monday evening, Macron headed to Beijing to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Xi said his French counterpart's trip signified Paris's will to improve ties with Beijing. France was the first Western power to establish diplomatic relations with China back in 1964. Chinese state media reported that issues other than bilateral relations discussed during their meeting included climate change and Xi's Belt and Road initiative.
President Trump and his administration are nearing the completion of a new Buy American plan, which hopes to garner billions of dollars more in business overseas for the United States weapons industry. The plan is also expected to ease export rules on U.S. military exports, which will give greater weight to economic benefits to American manufacturers rather than the long decision-making process, which focuses heavily on human rights considerations. The initiative is expected to be launched as early as February. The president, with this initiative, is hoping to create jobs in the United States and make a large shift in the current approach to weapons sales. Embassy staffers under this plan would act more as advocates for defense contractors.
The U.S. Army and the Department of Homeland Security have developed a virtual reality training game to simulate active shooter situations in schools. Intended for teachers and first responders, it leads you through classrooms and hallways as children run and scream for help.
Building through the main entrance. Top school protocol.
There have been more than 250 school shootings in America in the past 5 years. On average, that's nearly one a week. Already in 2018, there have been 2 reported incidents involving a firearm in school, and nearly 1/3 of all mass shootings in America since 2000 happened at schools.
It was quite a scare this morning. The alarm came in the FDNY dispatch system reading fire in multiple dwelling, parentheses, Trump Tower. And it was quite a scene when you looked at the top of the roof of this gleaming glass and chrome building. Smoke, white smoke, a lot of it billowing from the roof. The fire actually broke out in the roof system of the HVAC in a cooling tower. It did not break out at all inside the building itself. It took about an hour for the New York's bravest to tamp the fire down. There were 2 minor injuries, they say, a firefighter who had some debris fall on him, and a building engineer, but it was quite a scene. 70 firefighters responded, an emergency command center set up in the frigid 16-degree weather. And the New York firefighters, as they always do, they responded. Whether you're at the home of the president or a regular person like us, they did respond to this blaze quickly.
Secret Service that were monitoring the building noticed the smoke coming from the roof, and they called the fire safety director in the lobby, and by checking the cameras throughout the building, he did say we had flames coming out of a vent on the top of the building.
Well, Eric Trump tweeted this, quote, "There was a small electrical fire in the cooling tower of Trump Tower. The New York Fire Department was here within minutes and did an incredible job. The men and women of the FDNY are true heroes and deserve our most sincere thanks and praise."
Egyptians will head to the polls at the end of March in the first round of a presidential election. The National Elections Authority Chief Lashin Ibrahim says a second round will be held in April if required. He says the commission will accept applications from presidential hopefuls between January the 20th and 29th. Incumbent Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is widely expected to stand for re-election and win in the first round.
Turkey is to extend its state of emergency imposed after the 2016 coup attempt for another 3 months. It's the 6th such extension which has allowed Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government to launch a massive crackdown. It means Turkey will have been under emergency rule for 18 months. Turkey's Deputy Prime Minister made the announcement after a cabinet meeting saying that the National Security Council would discuss prolonging the state of emergency this month before seeking approval in Parliament. He said it was needed to confront security threats. The current declaration is set to expire on January the 19th. Since 2016, nearly 50,000 people have been arrested. Critics say the government has used its emergency powers to go after all opponents, including politicians, journalists and activists, and to bypass lawmakers by ruling through decrees.
Jordan's intelligence service has arrested 17 people suspected of having links to the Islamic State group and of planning attacks in the kingdom. Authorities say they foiled a major destructive terrorist plot planned by a terror cell loyal to Daesh 2 months ago. That's an Arabic acronym for IS. They say the group had planned to carry out several simultaneous terrorist attacks. Officials did not specify the nationalities of those arrested, but said weapons and other materials had been seized. The targets included security and military bases, commercial centres, media channels and moderate clerics.
France registered a record number of asylum seekers in 2017, with Albanians topping the list despite slimmer prospects of obtaining refugee status than those of people from war-torn places such as Syria, Iraq or Afghanistan. As the question of immigration is becoming a major political issue, the official number of asylum seekers in the country rose to more than 100,000. French President Emmanuel Macron has promised to shorten the time it takes for authorities to process asylum requests, but for those waiting in the very long lines, it is not helping yet.
But you have to stay in the queue like 24 hours. You have to, like, you want to get appointment for tomorrow, you have to stand up from now to queue until tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Without blanket and just queue like small plus, push each other.
As a study by an American Jewish committee found widespread anti-Semitism among Iraqi and Syrian refugees, Germany is planning to review a draft bill that would allow authorities to revoke the residency permits of migrants with anti-Semitic views. Chancellor Angela Merkel's party intends to introduce the draft legislation ahead of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January the 27th. The bill would not lead to automatic deportation of those accused of anti-Semitism, but it could harm their chances of gaining a permanent residency permit.
Cryptocurrency investors from all around the world think South Korea, Japan, Russia and the United States will lead the development of virtual currency markets in the years to come. According to a survey of nearly 700 investors published by VentureBeat, 27% chose Japan as the market leader, followed by 15% each for South Korea and Russia, and 14% for the United States. About 90% of respondents said they were looking to invest long-term, and 2/3 said they expect digital currencies to be used in the real economy within 5 years. Despite expert warnings of a bubble, more than 3/4 of the respondents said they will invest more in cryptocurrencies this year.
On to Australia, and at the stroke of midnight and in the early hours of Tuesday morning, dozens of same-sex couples exchanged wedding vows across the country as laws legalizing gay marriage took effect. Australia's parliament voted to legalize same-sex marriage in December after a nationwide postal survey returned an overwhelming majority in favor of gay marriage. The hashtag Oprah for President is trending after the talk show queen gave an inspiring New Day speech during the Golden Globes in support of those who have exposed sexual misconduct in Hollywood and beyond. In the past, Winfrey said she was not interested in running, but now it's being reported that maybe she has changed her mind. Earlier, we spoke to a Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, who says the White House administration is not concerned.
The spokesman said that the president is sharp as a tack. And if Oprah Winfrey wants to run for president, yes, a reporter asked about that because on Sunday night, Oprah gave such a speech at the Golden Globes award ceremony that many Americans are thinking she might want to run for president as a Democrat. Well, this White House spokesman said anyone who runs against Donald Trump in 2020 will have to oppose a president who's had record-setting achievements in record time.
Officials say hurricanes and wildfires helped make 2017 the most expensive year on record for disasters. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says last year's 16 weather and climate disasters caused $306 billion in combined damage. It counted hurricanes like Harvey, which dumped historic amounts of rain in Houston and the surrounding area, wildfires in California, and tornadoes in the Midwest. NOAA says each disaster exceeded $1 billion in damage. A researcher for NOAA told CNN that climate change is amplifying the frequency and intensity of certain types of extreme weather that lead to billion-dollar disasters. The previous record was almost $215 billion in 2005, due in large part to major hurricanes like Katrina and Wilma.
Winter weather has caused chaos in parts of Europe. In Paris, as water levels rose to new highs, roads and walkways were closed along the Seine River. A flood monitoring agency predicted that the Seine would top 4.5 meters by Wednesday before stabilizing. Heavy snow brought parts of Spain to a standstill over the weekend. Over 3,000 cars were stuck on the AP6 motorway in the northwest on Saturday night as they waited for rescue services to shovel out the snow. The road runs from the capital, Madrid, to the northwestern Galicia region. Germany's Rhine River was closed to shipping on Monday after rain pushed water levels up, the country's Inland Navigation Authority confirmed. There were fears the high water wouldn't leave vessels with enough space to sail under the waterway's bridges. But it's not all cold and rainy weather. Temperatures in Budapest on Monday hit unusual highs of around 8 degrees Celsius. Local residents donned sunglasses and braved leaving their thick coats at home. However, snow is expected to return by the end of the week.
Sand dunes in the Sahara Desert were covered with as much as 16 inches of snow after a rare winter storm. The snow started coming down January 7th near the town of Ain Sfara in Algeria. The town, dubbed the gateway to the desert, only got a dusting of 1 to 2 inches, but that was enough to disrupt traffic, stranding buses and cars. The snowfall marked just the third time the area has seen snow in 37 years. The winter wonderland, however, was short-lived. The snow quickly melted as the temperature climbed above 40 degrees Fahrenheit later in the day.
A huge truck dumped sand onto the ground at Manning Park. Then residents got to work, using shovels and even their hands to fill sandbag after sandbag.
People keep saying when the water comes down, it's not going to be water. It's when the mud comes down. There's baked earth above us, thousands of acres of baked earth.
The earth above them scorched by the Thomas Fire just weeks ago, and people who live below it are most at risk for flash flooding and debris flows. John Mui lives along a creek in Montecito, and he remembers when the community flooded in the 1960s, following a heavy rain that brought down mud and debris from the Coyote Fire scar.
The diversion of where this is actually going to go is going to be completely different than when I was a little kid, and it was just these big, massive estates, and it was all horse trails here. So it's going to be interesting to watch in that regard.
Stacey McCrory showed up today to volunteer, making sure her neighbors and friends are prepared.
I think it's important because, with fire we had some warning at least. Flood can happen very quickly, so I think people should take it seriously.
Residents who had little time to prepare, with the Thomas Fire threat only recently lifted, and now the first rainstorm of the season coming soon after.
This is a nice easy rescue, isn't it? Yeah.
Firefighters don't just get cats out of trees, they also get ducks out of the sewer. Queensland Fire and Emergency Services responded to a call that some ducklings got separated from their mom when they fell into a drain. Rescuers removed the cover and one of them jumped right in to retrieve them. One by one, he pulled the fluffy, chirping ducklings out of the sewer and put them in a box.
There you go, there's Mum.
Mama Duck was waddling around waiting for news on her babies. So firefighters led her back into the woods where they reunited the family. Together again, thanks to some human help.